Good morning, members of the UNESCO permanent delegations and colleagues, friends, and participants at the 41st General Conference. On behalf of the Global Education Monitoring Report and the UNESCO Institutes for Statistics, I wish you welcome to this important side event on benchmarking for the SDG 4 education agenda. Today, we will discuss insights into the development of national benchmark for measuring progress towards SDG 4 in a meaningful and comparative way. Over the next hour, we will have the opportunity to hear how the benchmarks can stimulate and contribute to policy planning, as well as domestic dialogues around educational ambitions. As the chair of the governing board of UNESCO Institutes of Statistics, and also I had the pleasure of sharing the ministerial meeting that adopted the framework for action. Benchmark is an important tool for both peer learning as well as development, accountability, and also mobilization for education. So I'm happy to moderate this side event. And before we are going on, I would just like to have 4 housekeeping rules, which is important to us all to make this run as smoothly as possible. First of all, this event, because of the room, we don't have the possibility to show all those who speak because we have 1 camera in the room. For those of you that are online, we will use the chat box to provide with the resources and the reference material that we are using in this meeting. So you may extract it from the chat box. The third is that for those who are taking the floor several times, we ask you to unmute your microphone when you are not speaking, and I will give you the floor, and then you can unmute it again. And for the online participants, I hope that you will be active taking part in this meeting, and please use the question and answer box to post your questions, and then we try to get as interactive session as possible. As some of you are aware of, there's been considerable attention to benchmark. It was figured at the Global Education meeting in July this year, and also at the ministerial segment, high-level segment, at this General Conference on Wednesday and Thursday. I think more than 10 heads of states participated, as well as 30+ education ministers. And benchmarks are important part of the new global coordination mechanism that has been established. To get us up to speed and to get a background for our discussion, we are happy to have the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report that will emphasize on how the benchmark can be used as a pillar for the new mechanism. And we also had the director for the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Director Silvia Montoya, who will be speaking and giving the background on the benchmark and the process up to now and the status of the benchmark, as well as the Global Education Observatory that's just been established. So I just think we'll run as fast as possible, and I give the floor to Manos, and then followed swiftly by Silvia for 2 5-minute presentations, or maybe even 6. Please, Manos.
And thanks everyone who's here, who's attending from Zoom. As Dankert said, apologies, I lost the track, so I may have to ask you to change the slides. The idea of benchmarking is intrinsic to the agenda for sustainable development. In 2014, the United Nations Secretary General, in his synthesis report, which formed the basis for the new development agenda, called on countries to embrace a culture of shared responsibility that would be based on benchmarking for progress. The education sector was very responsive in that respect. With a framework for action, which was signed 6 years ago by all countries were asked to establish appropriate intermediate benchmarks for 2020 and 2025 for selected indicators, seeing them as indispensable for addressing the accountability deficit associated with longer-term targets. Accountability featured in the framework for action more than actually in the UN's 2030 agenda documents. That was, of course, a long process. It was only in 2017 that the SDG indicator framework was approved by the UN General Assembly, and the UIS and the GEM report started work in 2018 to get us going in that commitment. As Duncan said, the Global Education Meeting in 2020 included a recommendation that by the end of this year, countries would accelerate the progress and propose relevant and realistic benchmarks on key SDG indicators for subsequent monitoring. And this is where we are here today. Next slide, please. A brief statement of what these benchmarks help us achieve. First and foremost, benchmarks mark the contribution that each country is making to the global agenda. Essentially, it brings to education the approach that has characterized the climate change agenda with their national determined contributions. And the idea is that benchmarks should be more ambitious than simply doing business as usual. The second objective is to make our progress monitoring much more context specific. Countries begin from very different starting points, and it is important that we acknowledge that, something that, of course, a global agenda document like the SDG 4 framework for action cannot acknowledge in itself. The third, and we think extremely valuable objective, is to link and make coherent the education agendas at the national, regional, and global level, which have not always been articulated. The fourth is that by focusing on a select group of indicators, we will focus also attention on selected data gaps for those indicators that no education system can actually function without knowing where they stand, and yet where we find still, as you will see, many gaps. The fifth is to strengthen national planning. There has been, of course, an explosion of national education plans in recent years, but many, as we found out, actually do not include targets. And finally, as Duncan said, we hope that these benchmarks will form the linchpin for the new global education cooperation mechanism, because they will focus our attention in our debates on where countries stand and where collective action is needed. Let me tell you, showing in the next slide, the process that we followed. I mentioned before that we started in 2018. In 2019, there was an agreement of the Technical Cooperation Group for SDG 4 indicators, the body, the intergovernmental body that is responsible for the development of SDG 4 monitoring, on 7 indicators that met criteria for benchmarking. And a year later, we also approved a process, a technical and political process of how to proceed. Starting with the October 2020 Global Education Meeting, we then worked in earnest to achieve this objective. Throughout the first half of 2021, we spent many hours working with all regional organizations in the world and also with countries, providing support and explaining the objectives of this process. And in August, the beginning of August, the Assistant Director General for Education shared with all countries an invitation to submit benchmarks by the 1st of October. So here we are today to let you know the results of this process and what we have compiled. A quick word in the next slides on what exactly we invited countries to do. First and foremost, we asked countries not to do anything new. We simply asked them to go to their national plans and extract targets that they already have in those plans for 2025 and 2030 or any other year that they had set as an objective. If a plan did not have a target for a benchmark indicator, or if there was no plan, we provided countries with some support on how perhaps they could set benchmarks, providing indicative values of where each country would be if they progressed, let's say, at the old long-term pace, or if they accelerated slightly to match the performance of other faster improving countries. If no submission was made, and many countries followed that path, if no submission was made, what we did in addition was to look at their plans and extract targets that already existed in order to complement the analysis. So in brief, the 7 indicators that are outlined in this set of benchmark targets are outlined on this graph. They cover basic education, pre-primary education, teachers, expenditure. There's a 7th, if you click again, there's a 7th benchmark on equity, and that was only agreed earlier this year, and countries were not yet requested. It's a gender gap in the upper secondary completion. It's a process we will continue next year. If you add them all together, if you click again, you'll see that countries were asked to submit 19 values for 2025 and for another 19 for 2030 if you add all the levels of education and all the on the subjects, different subjects that are requested for learning. So that's all for me, and Silvia will tell you more about the results of this process.
Thank you so much, Manos, and thank you. This is actually the findings we have had from this process. I have to say that we have a massive support to the UIS and the GMR and the invitation of the Assistant Director General of UNESCO in Education from the countries. And we really would like to step in two points: the progress, the data gaps, and the next steps. If we go to the next slide, I really would like to thank and to express the gratitude to all the countries who have engaged, and this is something that is really very important. We were quite pessimistic to some extent, and really has been overwhelming. We have almost 40% of the countries who have actually sent their templates. We sent a specific format with the clear instructions, and they have sent on the deadline. We have 10% of the countries, 2 of them submitted yesterday, they committed, and they were in the last step of the approval at the political level after their consultations and reviewing the numbers. Also, we have some very well set regional processes that have levels already set, that are the European Union and the CARICOM, which processes already have defined at the regional level some levels that in general are minimum to achieve by all member states in their regional organizations. And the rest is coming from national plans with targets, as Mano has described. We have mined more than 150 national plans. We have used from 18% of the countries because many of the others have submitted their templates. And then we have 12% of the countries that we have found plans, but those plans do not have targets. And this on top of these 8% of the countries who have no national plan. So there are 2 out of 10 countries that are in the situation that there are no concrete targets for any indicator. If we can go to the next slide. We have also mapped what are the indicators that are the most popular to some extent, or where we have gaps. We have not found targets for every single indicator for all the levels. As Mano said, we wanted 18 values for 2025 and 2030. This is not the case. We have not gotten, on average, we got 11 indicators per country. And in general, the indicators, as you could see, the pre-primary, the 1 year before the starting of primary education is the indicator who has in general more defined targets. Then we have completion and out of school rate as the following indicators that are having clear definition, but the light gray that you see is what is the gap between the total number of countries and the one we have submissions. And you also could see what are the source of the targets according to the submissions and the mining of the data plans that we have had. If we can go to the next slide, we can actually see the progress. This is a total preliminary estimation of where the world is going to be in each of the points in 2025 and 2030. Departing from the baseline in 2015, that is the moment we adopted the agenda and the education framework for action. you could see two arrows that are the light one in red is the 2025 and the dark red is the 2030. And this is how the countries are committing to improve from 2015, that is a baseline or the departing point, towards 25 and 2030 with the information we have compiled to this point. And all this information that you could see, we can make an initial evaluation if really we're having a right hope that we're going in the right direction or not, and what are the rate of progress. We obviously have also this disaggregated by region. This is our preliminary result of the compilation that actually was closed on Monday. And in the next slide, you could see where you can find this information. This information could be found in this moment in the Global Education Observatory we have launched this week. This is a very ambitious initiative from UNESCO that is trying to support the work of the Global Education Cooperation Mechanism. This Global Education Observatory is a gateway to education-related data, and a focal point for this follow-up process is composed by various observatories. One of them is the Benchmark Observatory, and this is exactly this first one and a starting point together with the COVID-19 Observatory, that these are the two ones that are the initial points to this, and is having already links to some of other data initiatives that we're having here from UNESCO, and is going to be compiling from other organizations and partners. If we can go to the next slide, this is, for instance, the way that you are going to find information for one indicator, completion rate, for instance. You have the set of countries, and you can see how it is distributed, and the baseline and the target for 2025 and 2030. If we can go to the next slide, the process is complemented because the benchmarks are not about only about looking at the progress. We cannot look at the progress if we don't have the data to look at the progress. And this is very important because we can actually look at the data points, and if the countries are having enough data, if they're not having no data at all, and if they're having only one number that is just allowing us to know where the country is located among other countries, but it's not allowing us to build trend over time. And progress is about having data to build a trend over time. And so we have resorted to that. And I just want to go and to describe the next processes. The UAS and the GMR will launch in January 2022 a baseline report with the results and the next step about this process. We're going to complete the gender gap. The technical cooperation group just endorsed the indicator on equity. So we're very anxious to actually to complete this set of indicators. And we have received many comments from countries about the willingness to report on this very important dimension that is equity. We're going to also to allow this discussion to adjust the values according to the COVID-19, because we know that many reflections are needed related to the impact of the pandemic that we're getting a sense right now about what is happening as the schools are reopening. And obviously to make the benchmark reporting part of the global cooperation mechanism to inform the policy dialogue and the common actions that they were really hoping that this new reform of our cooperation mechanism is going to be strengthening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Manos and Silvia, for this very brief but very succinct introduction to the benchmark and the benchmark process, and also not least the use of the benchmark in policy making. I now have the pleasure to have three speakers with me, or to be exact, one with me here physically and two online. So we will have a discussion on the use of benchmark and the process of establishing benchmark at national level, and also at regional level, and also the interlinkage between the regional and the national level for better policy making. I'm delighted to have Mr. Mahbub Hussain, Secretary of Secondary and Higher Education in the People's Republic of Bangladesh, here beside me in the room. And I also have online Mr. Shekana Lam, Director of Planning and Education Reform, Ministry of Education in Senegal. And I expect to hear your reflection on how you are progressing in Senegal. And I also have Mr. Bartek Lazar, Policy Officer, Coordinator of the Education and Training Monitor, European Commission, to discuss the regional perspectives and development on benchmarks. And I know the European Union has a long experience in using benchmarks. So I would first like to invite my colleague on the side, and I have one question for you, Mr. Hussain, and that is, how have you worked on benchmarks in Bangladesh? And did you do any special after 2015?
Topics, this data and benchmarking. Bangladesh has become a front runner in implementing SDGs, setting an example of the best practice in mainstreaming global goals and targets into the national plan, with an effective drive in SDG implementation by involving all stakeholders. As a result, the UN-sponsored Sustainable Development Solution Network has conferred Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina with SDG Progress Award at the 9th Annual International Conference of the UN SDSN in New York in September 2021. For Bangladesh, steady course in responding to the universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure peace and prosperity for all. In line with the global initiative, the government is committed to achieving inclusive and quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. The country's national education policy serves as the primary policy documents providing strategic guidance for the education sector in Bangladesh in line with SDG 4. The next priority for Bangladesh education system is to ensuring quality and equitable education. In order to achieve the commitment and provide quality education, we have internalized the SDG 4 global and thematic indicators into national needs by developing national indicator framework. We call it NIF on education with support from UNESCO and UIS and Bangladesh Bureau of Education Information and Statistics, a very dedicated organization in our country to deal with educational statistics. We call it BANBASE. Contributed as implementing agency. BANBASE is representing as the technical cooperation group member in the current cycle. The TCG, or Technical Cooperation Group, developed SDG 4 indicators in 2019 and made a proposal on 7 SDG 4 indicators that could be benchmarked. These 7 indicators cover early childhood basic education, teachers, equity, and financing. The first step was for organization to agree on the minimum regional benchmarking in July 2021. Then countries, including Bangladesh, participated in sub-regional consultation in September 2021 and learned the process of developing the regional benchmark values. Bangladesh has organized a national consultation with technical assistance from UNESCO and UIS. Bangladesh team for setting national benchmark values was comprised from different representatives from different organizations of Ministry of Education and Ministry of Primary and Mass Education, and UNESCO Dhaka, which was with us. We have a big number of stakeholders, and we worked together in 4 groups following online guidance from EOS and reviewed all relevant documents, including National Education Policy, our 8th 5-year plan, our Perspective Plan 2041, SDG Action Plan, Voluntary National Review, Bangladesh Education Statistics, National Assessment of Secondary Students, Annual School Performance Report, and many more. And after a thorough review by all concerned departments of Ministry of Education, the benchmark values have been shared with UIS via through our BNCU, Bangladesh National Commission for UNESCO. I thank my team members, UNESCO and UIS, for completing this very important task. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's both a comprehensive, inclusive, and impressive work you have been doing. So thanks for letting us know and inspiring the rest of us. Now I'll turn to the Director of Education in Senegal, Mr. Lamb. What has been your experience in Senegal, and how did you submit the national benchmarks to the UIS, and were such targets already in your national plans, or did you develop a new approach to it? So please, Monsieur Lam, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear facilitator. I would like to start by thanking the GEM and all involved for this initiative, and I'd like to tell you how satisfied Senegal is to have been able to participate in this major thinking process, which is actually defining for the future of our educational systems. Concerning the first question, which you asked us, the process started in Senegal in 2015. At the end of the first phase of the sectorial plan, and in order to start the assessment of this first phase, we received some policy guidelines suggesting that we review the sectorial policies according to these guidelines, and to review the strategic plan with reference to the revised package. This gave us two new tools to measure the yield, and also a matrix of key indicators, which I will get back to later. During this assessment of the first phase of the package, we drafted a simulation model. And as you will see, this model was extremely useful to us. That was what enabled us to make extractions and fill in most of the benchmarks and transmit them. That's also how we put together a sectorial team based on experts from the various sectors of the ministry. We have that specificity in Senegal that four ministries have to work together: national education, vocational training, higher education, and family, which is preschool education. So they're all involved in education, these four ministries, and the expert group which we put together to work on the assessment of the first phase and the redefining of our strategic plans and policies and monitoring. This team of experts was an important contributor to defining the reference, to defining the benchmarks. So in order to fill the benchmarks, we used three strategies with our expert team. For one thing, we did extractions in the CMR because our CMR covers 2018 to 2022. And that includes indicators that are relevant for most of the benchmarks. That's what we found. Two benchmarks, at least, that were filled directly, that the percentage of students that live up to the math and reading standards. Another tool is the projection based on the simulation model. Most of the next indicators, most of the next benchmarks are measured, but by a plan of action that goes no further than 2022. So we had to use simulations to project intermediary values for 2025 in particular. That's how we were able to fill the indicator on public expenditure. Also the completion rates with the expected reference values, and the four levels, including school dropout with 3 levels, and participation rate including preschool, which is just one value. The third strategy was an estimate based on the values that we got out of the Institute of Statistics. The indicator on a percentage of students at the end of a cycle is not sufficient for our country. This is something that we monitor by way of the certifying examinations. So we were able to do a direct extraction for grade 2 from age 9, roughly. But for grade 6, we couldn't do it. And so we had to produce estimates based on the values that were given to us by the statistics unit and the expert team. And we had to wait these results, and we should be able to do better in the future and work more in depth. I want to make it clear that for the 7th benchmark, we don't have the information. The gender equity is not something that we currently are in a position to monitor, so we haven't got the indicator in place yet. So far, we've just got a parity index, which is a completion rate at the level of the country. But we do commit to have an appropriate indicator in the future. We are currently defining the thresholds so we can have a more accurate gender indicator. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lam.
And now we will be moving from the national level to the regional level. And I'm very happy that Monsieur Bartek will be joining us online. And I know you have had a lot of experience in Europe, both on the challenging part of benchmark as well as the use of benchmarks. So please, if you could enlighten us on how you have been working on benchmarks in Europe, please. Please unmute your microphone.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Danka. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, co-chairs. Good morning, friends. Thanks for this opportunity to speak here at this important event. I wish to highlight for another time that the EU from this year onwards will be following a new set of EU-level targets that have certain repercussions for the process of better coordinating the SDGs on international and regional level. These new EU targets subscribe into a new 10-year-long strategy, an overarching framework through which the EU coordinates the efforts to better education across EU member states. The choice of the new targets means a commitment to complete the unfinished business of increasing the acquisition of basic skills, notably, and to give an opportunity for even more very young children to participate in early childhood education and care, and to lower even further the number of early school leavers who terminate education without the skills needed to function in modern society. Yet this new set of 7 EU-level targets highlights an issue that we have slightly different systems on the national level, international level, regional levels, in the UNESCO system about measuring the SDGs. And this new system on the EU level highlights a necessity to continue our efforts to increase the convergence of these systems. And I'm pleased to report that when we were approached by Manos and Sylvia, by UNESCO, about which of the EU targets we would propose for the EU as a region, we could identify 3 of them: the basic skills measured by PISA, the early leavers, and the ECHEC target, as the three that could be the EU's proposal for the SDGs on the regional level for further development. This doesn't preclude that the EU member states use their own targets, because we talk with the member states about the SDG indicators, yet the EU member states are free to choose their own measurements. I am only talking about the EU level measurement. I would like to finish with an announcement that there will be the 10th edition of the Education and Training Monitor that will be published at the European Education Summit, the Ministerial Summit, on the 9th of December this year. And it will be the 10th edition of the Monitor, and the first one to report on the new framework of the 7 targets of that was started by the Council resolution of the 18th of February this year, that introduced the cooperation framework towards the European education area and beyond. So let's continue these essential exchanges and let's assure a greater convergence of our systems in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bartek. And I think that what you have described as aligning the national and the regional and still keeping the national is an interesting point also to be following. And I'm looking forward to the release of the new report on the 9th of December. But I also would like to to follow the thread from the regional perspective and the regional plans and the national plans, and return to Monsieur Lam in Senegal, because you have the Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016 to 2025, which is aligning itself also to the SDG 4 agenda. And I would very much like to hear you experiencing from this relationship between the national benchmark and the regional benchmarks as in the plan. So please, Monsieur Lam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denkert. On this subject, I should perhaps recall that during this assessment of the first phase of our strategy, we paid particular attention to the commitments that our country had made, and that includes the national level, the strategic plan, which was devised by our own government, but also the sub-regional plan with the reform of the Western African plan. And then there's the continental level and the world level, CESAR and SDG 4. With this first phase assessment, we defined our new framework, which I was referring to in the first part of my reply. And that also gave us the possibility of drafting a new sectorial policy letter of commitments for up to 2030, which is aligned with Agenda 2030. And that was a way to readjust our sectorial plan, the package I was referring to, which is now based on the period for 2018-2030. These two documents were aligned with the objectives that are aligned with ODD4, SDG4, and the CESAR. And that enabled us also to include the major benchmarks of these two plans for our own monitoring framework. In particular, the yield measuring framework, which is aligned with our sectorial plan, and that sets the benchmarks for the monitoring of our own action plan in relation with our own sectorial team. And then there's on the policy level, where we devised a matrix with 20 key indicators, and we use that to coordinate with the partners in the local education partner group. These are two frameworks that were based on the major benchmarks that we share with these two agendas, SDG 4 and the thematic indicators, but on the world level, and then the CESA, the continental indicators with the work that we did in Nairobi for alignment. That's what the Statistics Institute called for. So this really enabled us to align with the various agendas and also to integrate on a technical level all of these benchmarks in our own measurement frameworks. With this, when we had to fill in the benchmarks, all we needed to do was extract the values that we had at our disposal and put them in the framework that we then sent on to the Statistics Institute. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lam.
Ask a question for my colleague on my right, the Bangladesh experience. I have two questions for you in one question. One is that what has been the challenge in harmonizing your national benchmarks? And do you have any advice to give to other countries on the process you have been through? Because from your first intervention, it was a very comprehensive process. So I think it's a lot to learn from what you have been doing. And my third little question, if you are able to answer that, and has the benchmark contributed to a policy discussion at national level in Bangladesh? So if you wanted to answer those two and a half questions, please.
Thank you very much. We found after reviewing many documents that I mentioned earlier that some discrepancies in targets between government documents and targets for minimum proficiency level, grade 3, and primary levels, only baseline figures are available. But in some cases, these figures are very old. In this context, the government has developed, as you know, that a handbook. We call it mapping of ministries by targets in the implementation of SDG, aligning with our 7th five-year plan. And later on, SDG implementation and monitoring committee was formed to follow up on the whole process of SDG planning and monitoring. This committee and this framework actually helped us a lot, because centrally they monitor our activities, and that monitoring system compelled us to be very active in this area on a regular basis. Second issue I want to mention that the ultimate measurement of the quality of an education system is what we believe that is the learning outcomes via learning assessment data. To track progress towards this goal, Bangladesh assess student learning in reading and math. There are also other emerging challenges for assessing learning, introducing formative assessments. I should say that this is one of the very critical area, and we need to learn from other countries as well in this area, because it's very new in our system. We need capacity support at an institutional level, and also for teachers. That was a very critical issue that we identify, and even sometimes we need capacity or awareness of our parents as well, even on community level, because that will be a very good shift. A very, very transformative shift from traditional, that we call it traditional way of assessment. So that was very, very, very critical challenge we have to face, that we note. And another issue that I should mention here, that the learning loss as a result of COVID-19 caused, as you know, that school closure was a reality. And this experience taught us the need for technological innovation in education, including assessment, using ICT, how we can do the assessment, we can modernize or we can digitalize the assessment process. That was a big challenge for us. And another issue I should mention, that equity and inclusion of data is essential, because equitable and inclusive provision in education is a must. We feel that we have done a lot of things to increase the accessibility. Still, we feel that limited access to some of the areas. We call it hard to reach areas, ethnic matrix groups, and children with special needs. So these areas are very critical, and we need to take note of these issues, that how we can monitor, how we can set as indicator in our policy decision. That will be very challenging issue. And as you said, that whatever we learn locally, we need to interface with global partners, because maybe we are doing better in one area and other countries are doing better in another area. If we interface regularly, if we meet regularly, then we can learn from each other, and that will benefit both the parties, or all the parties that we are involved in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a last question to Bartek in this round before I open up for the floor, and also online with a couple of questions I hope you have time for. The EU targets, you have already several years of experience behind you before you having these new 7 targets. And my question is, has this exercise been useful for national, for governments in their designing of their policies, education policies, and has it created some positive discussions at policy level in your member states? Mr. Bartek?
Thank you. Thanks for this question, Chair. I trust it did a lot, and this is the present framework has followed up on another framework of 6, what we used to call benchmarks, that contributed to, that guided the discussions with the member states for the previous decade. So this is only a fine-tuning of a framework that that already worked quite well, and that helped guide and refocus member states' efforts on areas that need urgent policy intervention. And I should stress that what made this framework work, what made it operational, was a firm anchoring of the indicators and targets in robust data. So we only picked indicators when we had data to back it up. I mean, as a tendency. However, this time around, we ventured into a new territory of digital skills to respond to the changing realities of society and education. So actually, it was a bold move to choose an indicator for which the data is in the process of being constructed, because it's a relatively new survey, a test, as you know, conducted by IEA. It's methodologically extremely robust and interesting. However, we are now trying to get as many member states on board as possible to make it another viable policy tool. So this was a divergence from this previous practice of picking only the indicators for which data is already available. And I would like to finish with one more example that that relates to VET and adult learning. There we had, so the labor force survey is a rich source of data for these indicators. Yet we observed in the previous policy cycle that the reference period of 4 weeks when respondents were confronted with the question, did you participate in an adult learning activity, in training, it actually made this the data stemming from this exercise less relevant for policy, because it was a patchy instrument that didn't capture many instances where people did participate, but not within this very narrow window of 4 weeks. So we had to change it. We discussed it with the member states, and we agreed that this indicator has to be changed. So now it's 12 months, which is a much more inclusive reference period. However, we have been confronted with the lack of data, and the data for this will only be available from April next year onwards. So sometimes these compromises are necessary. Yet all this we discussed in the relevant committees with our member states, so it was a joint decision. And the member states have claimed a lot of ownership in this new strategy, and this is the key to its success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know time is running very fast, and we have to end in 5 minutes, which means that I can only allow for a couple of questions. We have already received one online, and that's about the Global Education Observatory. Silvia, would you like to? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Duncan. Very quickly. No, the name of the country, I think that is an issue about the navigation. Yeah, the question was about the name of the countries. The observatory actually have the display, and then you can choose the countries by region. So this is an issue of navigation. So we can go take this offline and walk over it. The metadata of the indicator is the metadata of all the metadata that is already agreed for the global and thematic reporting. There is most of the indicators are global. There is only one that is thematic, that is out of school children. The metadata, we have not changed any single definition, because the indicators are the indicators that are agreed by consensus. There is no touch, no movement, no departure from what has been agreed. And the process of filling the submissions is described, the projections in document that has been actually for the last year. There are in our DCG, in the microsite, in the page related to benchmarks. The submissions and the process of mapping are described also in a tableau that is describing all and mapping the countries and which source of information we have taken for each country. So it's just going to the technical cooperation group microsite, and all the information is there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Then I open for, are there any questions in the room for some of the speakers? You have the opportunity, please. If you could state your name and...
My name is Elias. I'm from the Ministry of Education, Kenya. Also come with my colleagues, 4 of my colleagues here. So I want to, first of all, start by appreciating UNESCO UIS, the director meet virtually often of the Global Monitoring Report. First of all, this is a good idea that has just been initiated. Of course, as you have rightly reported, the last few years, the preparation of sector plans has become something common, especially us in the developing countries. And maybe the aspect of the target within the plans, which caught my eye, is as a result of we do develop the plans, and then we have action plans separate from the document itself. So at times, getting the real targets within the plan itself is a bit... so that's what we have been doing, and by bringing out this, specifically the issue of the targets and the benchmarks, I think it's something that can really assist. In Kenya, for example, we had challenge of female students joining university education and so on. We responded by coming up with a policy specific on gender in education and policy. Up to now, we've lowered, the entry grade for female students to the universities, and also some students coming from regions that are marginalized. And so, but what also I wanted to say is, even these indicators, I think the best is to base it on the regions, because in Europe, I'm hearing now they want to come up with an indicator on digital skills. While in Africa, maybe in East Africa, where I come from, participation is still a challenge. So the aspect of also, ensuring that we look at these things on the regional basis is very important. But I also want to say that maybe at the moment we've also been relying on, a guideline on preparation of sector plans and all that prepared by IIEP, the UNESCO, the GP, and all this. Maybe there's need also to revise that guideline for countries to make progress on the aspect of the benchmark and highlight it very well. So I think this is very critical, especially in decision making, because when a certain indicator is highlighted, policy decisions will be taken in elevating maybe the challenge that comes with it. Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kenya. We work very well. We have a project of measurement of learning outcome impact also that is a pleasure to work with you. Regarding the regional framework, actually, we didn't have the time, but I just wanted to clarify we're partnering with African Union for the CESA framework. And there are 7 additional indicators that are coming from the CESA framework that are also going in this second stage of the definition of the targets. We understand the regional nuances. So we have this work, and we're working very closely with our advisor in Africa. And actually, we're in the process of meeting now in December for the definition of these additional indicators that are specific for Africa from the CESA framework. And obviously happy to support on this process. Thank you.
And if I could complement, because we really believe in the need for regional organizations to be involved in this process much more, we submitted a proposal for a decision at the last meeting of the Technical Cooperation Group for regional organizations throughout the world to be actually permanent members of the Technical Cooperation Group. So far they have been observers, but precisely that dialogue is needed, and the Technical Cooperation Group is a very active body of exchange, and we think it is the right moment. Sylvia also maybe wanted to have added that some of the organizations, we of course invited the European Commission. We just mentioned the African Union. CARICOM was also mentioned, but we also had very good cooperation with the Southeast Asia Ministers of Education Organization, Southeast Asia, and with the Pacific community. And we want through this process to see more organizations in other parts of the world to strengthen their education agenda and actually make it monitorable, because that will help further increase, as you say, the commitment to certain priorities that at the end of the day are global as well.
Thank you very much, Manos. And I would just like to add to what's been said, and a very important question raised by Kenya, and that's the alignment of the different measurement tools and then different plans that are different organizations are using. So, and I hope that the new global coordination mechanism could look into that and could really try to see if the GPE, if UNESCO, if UNICEF are at least using the same measurements tool. I think that would be an advantage for ministries of education, not the reporting on different measures to different organizations. So I hope that could be on the table of the new global coordination mechanism. So thank you very much, Kenya, for your input. And then I come to the end of this session. I would like to thank the 3 speakers and also people in the room as well as people online. I hope you have got information, been inspired on how to process the work on the benchmark, because I think the benchmark is an important tool for policy planning. It's an important tool for accountability, but not least, it's an important tool for policy below the level as well as the regional. I say thank you all for participating. And sorry for not inviting those online for a coffee, but I just invite people in the room for a coffee at the bar, as well as please take your different materials end of this with you to be used. And I'm quite sure on behalf of UIS